Good evening, everyone. I will call to order the Moran Water Board meeting of March 19th, 2024. Terry, could we have roll call, please?
Yes, good evening. Director Larry Russell.
Here.
Director Monty Schmidt.
Here.
Director Jed Smith.
Here.
Vice President Matt Sampson.
Here.
And President Ranjiv Kush.
Here. Do we have a motion to adopt today's agenda?
So moved. Second.
Terry, are there any public comments on the agenda?
There are none.
If we could have a vote then, please.
Yes, Director Russell.
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
Vice President Sampson.
Yes.
President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Next item is public comments on items that are not on our agenda.
There are none.
Okay, then we'll move on to directors and general manager announcements. Monty, start with you.
Nothing.
Matt.
Thank you. I'd like to first start off by Ben, thank you and staff for pulling off a great board retreat on Thursday last week. I thought it was very productive and efficient, and I'm sure it took a lot of work. So thank you to the team for doing that. The following day, we had the Lagunitas TAC meeting for the first time. It was in person and hybrid here in this room, and it was neat. It was very well attended, both virtually and in person here. We got to hear a really good update on the progress of everything going on around Redwood Creek, including all the road work from Muir Woods out to Highway 1 and the process that's going for that. And then unfortunately, I had to leave a little bit early and I got to miss Phil Sauter's presentation on some broom stuff. And I'm hoping to get that from you, Phil, if you still offer still on the table for that. And then Larry, third time is a charm. We had a broom pull event on Saturday at the Bald Tail Broom Bust.
Good.
And the weather was awesome. Great turnout from all across the county, literally from Novato all the way down to Sausalito. And a big hats off to Suzanne, Sabrina, and Victor, and our partners with Marin County Parks for pulling that off. So it was great to be out there and hopefully taking care of some of the invasive stuff. The only other thing I have on Monday of next week, I'll be joining Supervisor Sackett and talking with the Lucas Valley Homeowners Association group concerned about some growth into their area and how the water will impact future development. So that's all I got.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Jed?
Yeah, Ben, thank you. And thank you team and staff for having the offsite that was put together. What I appreciated most was that it was a dialogue, that there was room for input, that the public participated, and it was a working document and event. And coming right off of last year's general manager's report, it's great to see us continuing to set targets, goals, metrics, and that we can measure ourselves and continue to try to do better. So that was great. Thank you. I was also lucky enough to attend the employee recognition event today in the yard, which was, I thought, a terrific effort by this organization to strengthen the culture that we have, to recognize the hard work that this team is throwing out and at and for our community. I was just proud to be a part of it. I thought it was well attended. It was a really nice kickoff to this year.
Thanks, Jed. Thanks also for representing at the employee recognition event. That's great. Larry?
Okay, well, we had an operations committee meeting on Friday, March 8th. Staff provided information on the 2024 Sir Francis Drake Boulevard Pipeline Replacement Project. This project was referred to the board for future meeting. Staff also provided information on the Granada Drive Pipeline Replacement Project. These projects are fairly substantial in size and require some pretty special traffic control issues. This project was also referred to the board for a future approval. Staff provided an update on the Phoenix Bontempi Connection Project, which is the cross-country pipeline that connects the two reservoirs. This project was reviewed and then referred to a future board meeting. Staff provided an update on the Enterprise Resource Planning software, or it's called ERP. That's the SAP program at this point in time that's running things within the district. And the conversation was about how it's going to be updated and what form of software might be used. These reports, that meeting and these reports can be accessed on a video from the March 8th Operations Committee meeting. And that's all I got.
Great, thanks, Larry. And I have one, last Friday, March 15th, I joined staff in a meeting with the San Francisco District Office of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Congressman Huffman at Nicasio Reservoir to review our plans for a pipeline connection between Sulahuli and Nicasio Reservoirs as one of our water supply improvement priorities. The meeting objective was to discuss the remaining steps for securing WARDA funding for the project, which we're estimating to cost about $19 million. WARDA stands for the Federal Water Resources Development Act, which is administered by the Army Corps of Engineers. And we've been authorized for $28 million in funding, I understand, but that's contingent on annual appropriations from Congress. Also, it seems that the next round of appropriations are not yet finalized, but we received, good positive feedback from the Army Corps district staff on our probabilities. Our Sulahuli-Nicasio connection is included in their current funding priorities. They appreciate the benefits of fully integrating Sulahuli into our system, and they also understood the longer-term potential for further connections to North Marin and Sonoma. They did make a few recommendations on follow-up at 3 levels. They suggested a second tour with their district commander. In this meeting, we met with the deputy district commander. They also encouraged meetings with the Corps' division office, which is also located in San Francisco. And finally, they emphasized continuing engagement to build upon previous efforts by Jed, Sean, and Paul, and others. So I think they really wanted to see us succeed in this effort. I want to emphasize Congressman Huffman's efforts in ensuring that Marin Water will benefit from federal funding to improve our water supply resiliency. And finally, I want to note the excellent organization of the whole day by Sean, JP, Adrian. It was super professional. Adrian, I just want to call out the handout that you prepared for that. I think it would be good to share that with all board members. They're just great talking points on our water supply development program. And yeah, that's it for me. So I'll pass it over to Ben for any general manager's comments.
Thank you, President Cush. I'd like to build upon the comment we heard from Director Smith on the employee recognition event today and share with the board the award winners that were recognized. And as you may recall, these are nominations that come from staff and selection from the nominations by a staff committee that also puts on the event and does quite a bit of work. We're very appreciative of the recognition committee. So there were 4 awards today. The first award recognized an innovative team. And previously, when field staff worked in an area without cell service, it's difficult and often impossible to pull up details about our system infrastructure, plans or specifications, SOPs, and the like. The honorees in this, the winners in this category developed a creative way to load all of our infrastructure data onto tablets that staff has in the field in a way that they'd remain safe and secure. And that had been an obstacle previously of having this information out there like this. And as a result of their efforts, field staff can operate more effectively by having access to the necessary information. They're more effective and can get their work done. So congratulations to engineering records technicians, Andrew Reese and Andrew Trujillo, that developed this new approach. The second award recognizes an individual unsung hero. And this honoree is always willing to take on a task, troubleshoot, offer support, welcomes new employees, guiding them through the process. When her team is under pressure, she offers to take on additional tasks, supporting their success. Congratulations to Administrative Assistant of the Watershed Division, Sabrina Gonzalez. The third award is recognizing a team for their efforts to ensure safety, of course, the key issue in an operating organization like ours. And the operators at San Geronimo Treatment Plant discovered erratic sodium hydroxide feed, one of the chemicals that we feed as part of the treatment process, which required an unplanned shutdown on the full plant with an unknown duration. This group of awardees arrived like a pit crew for a NASCAR team. After flushing, they quickly set to work identifying, removing, replacing the lines and valve that had been coated with buildup and put in a new injector. The ability to complete a substantial amount of work efficiently enabled the treatment plant to resume normal operations far quicker than was anticipated. We're very appreciative to the award winners of the district's mechanical and electrical team, Pete Kleiner, Art Hung Perkati, Joe Frank Martinez, and Jake Eldridge. The final award from today was for extraordinary teamwork. In February, the district executed an emergency contract for the repair of the Alpine Bontempi transmission lines due to cracks on the discharge flange at the manifold barge. This project posed significant challenges due to its location on and over water, not a typical working environment. And the team provided support to the project contractor, facilitating an understanding of our system and the need, assisted with the installation of complicated rigging for the pipe, and a range of support to effectively conduct repairs, working as an effective, cohesive team. They demonstrated their finely honed skills as boatmen, riggers, and knowledgeable pipe repairmen for this emergency repair in an atypical location. Congratulations to Dennis Soldavini, Ulysses Aliman, Justin Codoni, and Ray Del Santo. So it was all of these activities are very meaningful. And as we heard from Director Smith, it was a very nice event today. Our summer event, we're planning kind of as part of a revamp, the start of a revamp of a recognition program. We're going to do it at the Watershed. We've reached out. I think we have a date at this point. June 20th. Thank you, Adrian. So if you could mark that down, it'd be super. Thank you. That's all my comments today.
Thanks, Ben. Inspiring. It's really inspiring. Looking forward to the summer event. Good. So now we'll move on to our consent calendar. And I just want to note that today our consent calendar covers 3 items: the minutes of our board meetings on February 27th and March 5th, the general manager's report for February 2024, and approval of a 3-year Wildland Fire Services General Services Agreement contract with Biswell Forestry LLC, which was presented previously. Terry, do we have any public comments on the consent calendar?
Yes, we do. Mr. Phil Sauter.
Good evening. I found the demand management report to be thought-provoking in the GM's report. There are 28 different water efficiency programs listed, with the interactions for each program listed for the last 2 fiscal years and through February of this year. While there's no estimate given for the effectiveness of any of the programs, such as estimated gallons of water saved for any of the activities, I looked at a couple of programs which would seem to have some effectiveness. The first is Conservation Assistant Program consultations. 2 years ago, we did 731 of those consultations, and last year it dropped to 291. I once asked Carrie about those residential consultations, and she said her staff had very interesting interactions with customers. I asked if some of those interesting discussions, suitably redacted, could be made available. She said they could not. I'm not sure what actual results that program is yielding. I'd assume the results are good, but perhaps not if the district has chosen to do fewer of them. Another program is public outreach through customer calls. 2 years ago, there were 9,500 calls made. Last year, it was cut in half to 4,150 calls. And this year, the trend continues to go down. Again, it's not clear what the effectiveness of those calls is, nor what's the reason for making fewer calls as time goes by. Another program I'd assume to be effective is the letter sent to AMI customers who are suspected of having a leak. There were 1,050 of those letters sent 2 years ago, and last year there were 1,168 letters sent. It's good to see that program getting a boost. It should be pretty easy to monitor customer usage before and after the letters are sent to see what the payoff is. All of this information, with the addition of estimates for actual savings for each of those programs, or at least the top ones, will be very useful in determining which of the 28 programs are having results and which ones are not having any measurable results. And of course, this information will be invaluable as part of the demand management presentation in May. Finally, I'd like to thank Adrian very much and her team for the bluebirds that were in my last water bill. I really like this pamphlet here, which is giving folks a heads up for the irrigation season that's coming and what they can do to get better results. And then this on the water front description here singles out a woman who got a flume and found a leak and saved 40% on her water bill. I think that's really insightful and timely, and it's really nice that we have those stories to tell. And I hope we'll be able to feed more of them into the communications staff as the years go by. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then do we have a motion to approve our consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Could we have a roll call vote, please, Terry?
Yes, Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
Vice President Sampson.
Yes.
And President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
We'll move now to our regular agenda, beginning with agenda item 8A, emergency contracting provisions for West Peak power pole removal. Sean?
Yeah, good evening, board member Sean Horn, Director of Watershed Resources. So the item before you is we're asking that the board consider adoption of a resolution approving the use of the district's emergency contracting procedures to support an emergency power pole removal project at West Peak and awarding that contract to Pinnacle Power Services in the amount of $126,000. To give you context for why we need this emergency, we've got a brief PowerPoint that we're going to pull up to give you kind of a better understanding of on the ground conditions and what's happened at West Peak. So we'll review the sites of West Peak and the power poles that are remaining up there. This is remnant infrastructure from the old Mill Valley Air Force Base that was there. The emergency resolution's in the package tonight, and we're asking that the board consider utilizing that to allow for an emergency contract to go forth to conduct the removal of a number of power poles. There's a total of 48 power poles and 18 transformers that need to be removed. So this is a map of the site. This is the old military base footprint, and the turquoise lines through that are the old power line infrastructure that supported the military base. It was decommissioned a long time ago, but it was in place. On February 5th, that weekend, we had about 100-mile-an-hour winds up at West Peak, and a number of these poles came down, and that's created a hazardous condition. So this site has been closed since that time. On February 5th, staff and operations department reached out to PG&E and have them come up and assess the power lines that were still up there to ensure that they were de-energized. And then over the next week, we worked with PG&E to actually cut those lines and orphan them from the system so that we could support this removal process. From there, we reached out to a number of companies to come help provide quotes for what we might be able to do in removing these power poles and associated infrastructure. We got a bid on February 28th from Pinnacle Power Services to do the work. Due to scheduling, we had to look at doing it on weekends and in order to get it done as soon as possible. This site's been closed though because there's a number of trails. They're kind of hard to see, but the black dashed lines are trails that go into the West Peak site. The red orange hashed lines are actually social trails that people also use to go in and out of the site when they're exploring up on the top of the mountain. So due to those wind events, we had a number of these poles come down. And this is really old infrastructure that's been up there for a long time. A lot of these poles are just kind of failing in the middle. You know, they've rotted out. They really need to go. So we have a number of down poles and other ones that are teetering on becoming down. And all of this infrastructure is kind of a tangled mess up there right now. And so we're trying to move forward with the repair to make this site accessible again to the public and make sure that we get this infrastructure and hazard out of the way as soon as possible. So There's also transformers that we're going to have to deal with that are beyond what the contractor that's removing the poles can deal with because of the hazardous nature of the chemicals used inside of the transformers. So we're looking to contractors that can actually come and transport and dispose of those accordingly. So the schedule for the project right now is to start on Thursday with the removal process. It's going to take 2 crews initially removing it and then following up on the March 30th weekend to complete the removal. And we're hopeful that those 2 events will be able to get all the power poles down, all the lines wrapped up, and the transformers secured and placed in a secure spot until we can get a contract in place to remove those permanently from the site. We're also working with the contractor to see if they can sub-consult with the contractor to help with the removal of those features as well. So a couple more steps until that site is open again. It's going to be soliciting proposals for the transformer removal and then contracting and scheduling that work to be conducted. So with that, if you have any questions about the project and what we're trying to do with this contract, we can answer those. Otherwise, as I mentioned, this is an action item requesting that we adopt the resolution to allow us to utilize the emergency contracting procedures with Pinnacle Power Services.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Directors, comments or questions? Larry, we'll start with you this time.
Well, I had a few, but you answered most of them. I think that the transformers may not be as difficult to deal with as you might think. I think you can remove the oil and deal with it separately. The oil is the problem, not the transformer. The transformers probably have a fair amount of value because of the amount of copper in them. They're probably very copper rich, the 1940s military style. So it may not be as bad as you think. And the quantity of oil is not that hard, not that much. It's maybe a transformer that size is a few gallons.
Yeah.
So hopefully there'll be an alternative.
Thanks, Larry. Jed? Matt? Monty? Okay, well, thanks, Sean. I'm glad we're getting this taken care of. Was there any prior to disconnecting these, could that have been a big potential fire hazard?
No, they were de-energized long
Okay.
ago when the military left the site. We just worked with PG&E to be certain that before any staff was working around the site or we had contractors up, that they were, separated from the system fully.
That makes sense. Good.
Well, there doesn't appear to be any wires on those poles.
There's wires between them.
There
And
were,
then there's
okay,
also
'cause
AT&T wires that we've had to
I
deal
just wondered how much has been scavenged.
with. Oh yeah, not yet.
Not much?
Yeah.
Okay, they will be.
Okay, then do we have any public comments, Terry?
There are none.
Okay, so I just want to clarify the resolution here. It seems to have 2 parts. So one is to approve the continuing use of the district's emergency contracting procedures. And then the second part is to ratify the award of contract number 2021 as executed by the general manager to ensure the rapid removal of downed and partially downed power poles and associated infrastructure at West Peak. Do we have a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Thanks. And so then, Terry, if we could have a vote, please.
Director Russell,
Hi.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson,
Yes.
President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
On to agenda item 8B, legislative update. Sean, that's you again.
And I'm going to be joined by JP. So this item is a legislative update. The district tracks legislative items periodically, and I'm joined with JP Haler, our grants program coordinator. So tonight, we've been tracking a number of legislative bills that we wanted to bring to your attention. I'll note that attachment A is a list of positions that the board can consider taking on any of these bills. It's there for reference and consideration. The 3 bills that we're going to be discussing tonight include Senate Bill 1159, Assembly Bill 2257, and Assembly Bill 2196, and we'll walk through each of those. Staff is proposing that we adopt a position of support for Senate Bill 1159 and AB 2257, and a watch position for AB 2196. So the first one is SB 1159 by Dodd, which is relating to roadside wildfire vegetation and safety. So this is actually asking the governor's office and the Department of Natural Resources to consider an exemption for roadside vegetation management. This wouldn't directly benefit the district because we have an adopted EIR for vegetation management that allows us to do that work, but it would be incredibly beneficial for fire agencies and local communities to be able to work on evacuation routes and roadside vegetation around communities. And you can imagine that would also benefit the district in the instance of an emergency so that we can access our water infrastructure facilities throughout the county. So we're suggesting that we, support this and adopt a position of support for this so that we can kind of support the countywide effort. And we will note that fire agencies have been in support of this particular bill, and it does bring a lot of benefit to the community. So maybe it's easy if we have any discussion on that item first and then
Yeah,
go on to the next one.
That sounds good. Maybe Matt, we'll start with you on this one.
No, I appreciate staff's time to review these pieces of legislation, especially at this point in the process in Sacramento where they're going through. And this one here, I think, of importance, it really allows a lot of the funding from all these grants and all this work that's being put into vegetation management not to be haphazardly applied based on a project's ease, but actually put it where it's needed at first. And then it also allows agencies doing work out in the hinterland to have a better understanding of the impact of that work because they have more time to study when these things are coming up. So I think this is a good call to support and I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Monty?
I do think this is also seemingly a good piece of legislation. I just would request though that when we do bring these things that we identify if there are both the entities that are supporting it publicly as well as entities that are opposing it, just so that we can understand the breadth of where the public is seeing this bill. So do we have any awareness of any groups currently opposing this bill or the ones we're going to get to?
We didn't see opposing positions for this particular bill. We did see support from fire agencies. That was the only kind of group that we saw supporting this bill currently that's listed on the legislative items.
Okay. Great. I support this bill, but I just think it's a matter of process. I'd like to make sure we always hear both sides so that we can be aware of that.
Good point, Monty. Thank you. Jed? Larry?
Yeah. For those of you, if you don't know Bill Dodd, you should meet him. He is extremely personable, a delightful individual. And that triggers a thought to my mind, Ben. For most of the time I've been on the board, we used to go to Sacramento. 2 board members would go with a group and we would go office to office to office to office, always hitting McGuire's office, always hitting Dodd's office. And no, this is state. Always hitting the Mark Levine's office. And it was very effective. In that it introduced the board members to Sacramento. It introduced Sacramento to the board members and ended up with developing friendships. Like I'm still reasonably tight with Mike McGuire. And, I'm always amazed when I run into McGuire because he will come up and say, "Hi, Larry, how are you doing?" Nobody introducing me. He just remembers. And it's something I think we should think about doing. We did it with somebody, the lobbyist or somebody like that organized it. And there would be maybe a dozen people like us in there. They'd be Marin people, but there might be supervisors. There might be that level and people from North Marin, people from Marin Water. So anyway, something to think about. But like I say, you should get to meet Bill Dodd. He is a pleasure.
Great comment. Good suggestions, Larry. I think, Sean, we can move on then to Assembly Bill 2196 before we consider the resolutions. I thought we could do them both together.
I also just want to recognize too that we need to be mindful that these things that bills like these any bill can change. We're far from done, and so when we register support, we've got if we do or opposition that they need to continue to be monitored to see what and any substantial changes need to come back to the board to ensure that we're still in support of the legislation that's being proposed.
Right. So actually, Sean, let me see if it looks like we're considering positions of support for the Senate Bill 1159 and Assembly Bill 2257. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm going to hand it to JP for the, do you want to go to 2257 first? Which is-
Sure. Then we can maybe stop, do the vote, and then move to the last one.
Yeah, that's fine. When it's read.
Good evening, board members. My name is JP Haler. I'm the grant program coordinator. So the second piece of legislation we wanted to bring to your attention was Assembly Bill 2257, local government property related water and sewer fees and assessments and remedies, introduced by Assembly Member Lori Wilson. This bill would require that potential litigants challenging a public agency's water or wastewater rates would first need to exhaust their administrative remedies by raising objections to the agency prior to the time of the rate adoption. The Association of California Water Agencies is sponsoring this bill to aid public agencies in defending against Prop 218 lawsuits by requiring litigants to participate and raise specific objectives during the public administrative process. This proposal intends to bring to light all possible complaints and provide an opportunity to resolve a dispute and avoid litigation altogether. Aqua is encouraging members to join a coalition in support of the bill as it moves through the legislature. Based on this, staff is recommending that the board consider adopting a position of support on AB 2257.
Okay, thanks, JP. Board comments on this one. I guess, Jed, start with you.
And I'd love Molly's comments.
Yes.
I agree.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to comment on this. This was legislation that Aqua was looking at actually last session and did hold off. But I think it would be helpful. It's similar to for any of you who are familiar with the CEQA process under the California Environmental Quality Act, there is an obligation by folks who may take objection to the actions that are before a legislative body to actually bring forward those issues to the legislative body so that there's an opportunity for those to be considered. Maybe there's a revision process that happens. And this is similar to say through our rate setting process in particular, that we would like folks first to come forward, let us know what the issues are. And then that would be a requirement under certain circumstances that the board would follow procedurally. That would be a requirement before they could file a lawsuit. There's also a second section that's sort of hidden in there, not really hidden, but less focused on, and that is the requirement that the courts look at the administrative record, and it talks about what should be in the administrative record in the event of a Proposition 218 rates challenge. And I think this is important because it's possible to get mirrored down in discovery types of disputes. And this is really a writ of mandate or a petition type of legal procedure that should be focused on the record. The board, when it makes decisions on rates, is looking at the record, all the work that went into the rate process, the COSA, the notice, the protests, and the comments. And that's really what's the basis of these decisions. So this is just saying that that's what the court should consider too in the event of a challenge. And there are some minor exceptions to that. But for the most part, that makes sense to me. And I would agree with Aqua's sponsorship, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thanks for that. It's also clear that once people go through that process, bring forward their issues, give us the chance to respond, that they still can sue us, right? So it's not like we're saying you can't sue us. It's just saying that let's go through a process and try to resolve it before we waste millions and millions of dollars where the lawyers win, and we could have solved it in other manners. All right, thank you, supportive.
Okay, Larry?
What I find interesting is that's the defense, isn't it, that we used, that they didn't do that. So it's kind of odd. It seems to me they're codifying what is a defense that was used to defeat them.
Well, exactly. And actually, the court interpretations of Prop 218 are sort of moving in a different direction. So I think this is a legislative adjustment that can help focus the courts and emphasize the need for that prior involvement to give the legislative body, as Director Smith said, an opportunity to respond and consider and work things out ahead of time. But you're not wrong on that either, Larry.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Matt?
Molly, would this affect the current process we utilize during this rate setting process at all, or is that still protected?
It's actually an additional process. So it would be a very similar process to what we went through last year, with an additional requirement actually for the legislative body, for the district to receive comments in writing. There would be an additional notice requirement in the Prop 218 notice that's out there. It would have to still be made available within, for 45 days. There would have to be a clear explanation that written comments needed to be received in order to have a response from the agency. The agency would actually have to respond to each of those and to make that part of the record at the rate hearing. So it's really an augmentation to the process. There would still be a protest proceeding. That does not change, and someone could still file a protest at the public hearing where the rates are adopted. Would not have to be in writing, or actually the protests do have to be in writing, but the objections to the rates themselves would need to be specific about what are their concerns? What do they think we're doing wrong if there's something that they're objecting to? So.
Monty?
Yeah. So again, this one more particularly than the previous one we were discussing, is of interest to me because while on the surface, I think it seems like a cleanup of due process that makes sense. I'm always concerned about making sure that legislation that narrows or restricts public input and process is done very carefully. And so I would look to understand who are the supporters. I understand why Aqua is obviously, but I would look to understand who are the constituents out there or the groups that are out there that might be raising concerns about this. Again, this is pretty early in the process still. The legislative process is quite a sausage making process for those who are familiar with it. And things like this can change quite a bit. And so I'm a little concerned about registering support for this now without understanding a little bit better how other, I think, ratepayer advocacy and due process advocates view this piece of legislation.
JP, any thought? Have you seen anything on either support or opposition?
Sorry, I'm getting used to this microphone. No, actually, when we were looking at this, Aqua is the only thing we found as a support, which I think includes a lot of different agencies and organizations. Maybe Molly knows more.
I would suspect that county and city jurisdictions would also support this type of legislation. And I'm not sure of the opposition. I'd have to look into that further.
And it just because there's opposition to something doesn't mean that we wouldn't still support it. I think what I'm trying to make sure we're cautious about is that we don't need to necessarily act now to be supportive. I think this is that part of the process where authors are looking for supporters, and early ones at that are always valuable. But I think there's no harm in us taking the time to make sure that that this bill evolves correctly and that it ends up being something that we can support and that we understand the full ramifications of it. So in that way, I would recommend that we actually take some time to understand how this bill is going to evolve, and I would like to understand better how others are viewing it.
So I think I'm going to suggest we then break these up. So let's start with Senate Bill 1159, the roadside wildfire safety bill. I think next step, Terry, is to check on any public comments.
There are none.
Okay, and then so now we'll consider a vote to adopt a position of support specifically on Senate Bill 1159. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Could we have a vote, please? Terry?
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith.
Aye.
Vice President Sampson.
Yes.
President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, and then let's move on to Assembly Bill 2257. I'll first ask if we,
Could I make a motion though that I don't know if we need to vote on on this now. I think I mean maybe that's the action that I could make a motion that we consider this bill at a later date. I don't know if that is a matter of due process, whether that's,
We need a second.
and we can take a second on that.
if,
I'll second it. Happy to look at it further. I don't think we're in a rush. We can bring it back to a future meeting.
I think that sounds fine with me, man.
Okay.
We probably should correct the text here. Dodd is a senator, state senator, not an assembly member.
We'll
Oh,
correct
yes, yes.
So we have one more bill to
Sorry,
review. with you?
I just want to check if we have any public comments related to Assembly Bill 2257.
There are none.
Okay, just checking the boxes, Sean. Move on to Assembly Bill 2196 then.
He wants to.
Wait,
Oh,
do
sorry,
do a
but
vote?
yeah, I forgot that box. So we do have a motion to wait on this one and a second. So if we could
Yes.
have a roll call vote, please.
Director Russell, you want me to, can I go back?
No.
Okay. No, okay. Director Schmidt?
Aye.
Director Smith?
Aye.
Director Sampson?
Yes.
President Kush?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, Sean. Assembly Bill 2196 or JP.
So the next bill that we wanted to bring to your attention is Assembly Bill 2196 Beaver Restoration, introduced by Assemblymember Connolly. And this bill, we are recommending that the board adopt a position of watch on. And to your point, Director Schmidt, I did look in to see who was supporting or opposing this. It was just introduced at the end of February, and I couldn't find any.
Thank you.
This bill codifies the work of the Beaver Restoration Program, authorizing the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to relocate beavers, allowing the species to assist in restoring watershed and ecosystem properties. This bill would expand the current effort by authorizing CDFW to authorize non-CDFW staff to carry out relocation. This legislation could allow other entities a way to reintroduce beavers, providing another tool to help enhance salmon habitat. This could be beneficial for salmon bearing streams in Marin. If passed, it will be important for the district to be involved in local planning associated with the Lagunitas Creek watershed specifically. It is still unclear to district staff how this proposed legislation would impact the district's involvement with important planning activities. And based on that, we're recommending a position of watch. Staff will continue to monitor AB 2196 as it's making its way through the legislative session. And then another thing we wanted to note was just that the Board of Directors authorized a letter of support for CDFW on 3/17/2022 to continue the analysis of the reintroduction of beavers to the Lagunitas Creek watershed. As part of CDFW's assessment, the district requested that CDFW evaluate potential drinking water issues associated with reintroduction activities to ensure that drinking water is not affected. Also noting that reintroducing beavers to salmon-bearing streams can create critical nursery habitat, which is in short supply in Lagunitas Creek.
Thank you, JP. Directors, comments, questions on this one? Jed, you want to start?
Were we consulted when they were drafting this proposal?
No, we were not.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a statewide initiative.
Yep.
There are some nonprofits that have been, advocating for beaver restoration. Some that do support this particular bill would be Cal Trout and Occidental Arts and Ecology Center have been involved in.
Thanks.
Larry?
Is a beaver a beaver? I mean, aren't they can't all be identical. So isn't it a form of an invasive species if it's not the beaver that was here?
No, there's native beavers in the region. So, Napa County has an abundance of beavers. Martinez has beavers in it.
So they would be likely the same
Genetically,
ones that were
right,
here
yeah.
genetically. And the next question is, how much of the woody debris that we removed came from these guys?
Yeah, historically, there's probably a lot of vegetation that would have been brought down by beavers in the waterways.
One would think.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like having in a simple-minded sense, a termite, that's coming in and changing what structure is without any logic beyond their thinking of, I want to build a dam here.
Yeah.
So I'm all in favor of the beavers, but it just seems to have kind of I'm not sure I'd agree with you that it's necessarily salmon enhancing, because of what we've been doing, restoring the woody debris. I don't know what happens when you turn these guys loose. And, like I say, their interest is not about salmon except for eating them, to my thinking with the beaver. They're a pretty aggressive aquatic eater from what I've seen about them, but they are pretty.
Yeah, I'll just note that, right, salmon evolved with beavers in their watersheds often. And so the deep pools that are created from the dams and the complexity from the down trees, all of that is really important for just the complexity of our streams and the geomorphic processes that then support the salmon populations and other aquatic resources.
So the previous thinking was just wrong when we pulled the
Yeah.
woody debris out.
When we pulled the woody debris out, when we trapped the beavers, yeah.
But they
Great.
needed the coats and the hats.
Thanks, Larry. I'll move to Matt.
Thank you both again for the analysis on this and for the cautious approach. It seems like there's been identified potential that this could be a good thing. And being able to leverage the efforts from our local assembly member might not be bad either. So I would request that we reach out to their office and find out how we can input or what kind, or allow us to provide input, and then maybe even take a look specifically at Lagunitas Creek or some other areas that these could be beneficial, and find out how we could help input on the bill so that it becomes more attractive for us where it's at right now.
Good points, Matt. Thank you. Monty?
It's a new bill. So again, like I've been saying with all these bills, it can change a lot. But I'll just say that, as Sean, you eloquently put it, the beavers and salmon co-evolve together, and these maybe to explain some of the greater benefit that we could get out of this, which is that beavers build really important summer habitat for free. And that means that the water that we are releasing downstream to help improve salmon populations is, put to even greater use. And that helps our numbers go up. It means that the water that we are putting down is having a greater benefit on the recovery of these species. And again, it's work done for free. And I know that we need to be thoughtful and intelligent about thinking about the potential impacts for our work. I think, probably nothing like, there'll be some challenges that it might create, but I'd like us to make sure that we do reach out to the author and other groups to understand the bill better. But I think ultimately, in keeping with our mission to safeguard and steward Lagunitas Creek, this is ultimately, I think, something that will be a huge benefit to us and for free. So I'd like to see us be thoughtful about it, but see what we can do to resolve any concerns that we might have.
A lot of interest and follow up on this one. Yeah.
I have a few more questions.
Okay, Larry.
Will they stay downstream of the dams?
I think we're gonna have to make bets on that. I
Because,
think you just really don't know where they'll evolve.
The point about water quality is Giardia is called beaver fever, and obviously it's called that for a reason. So these guys are carriers of the Giardia cyst.
Yeah.
I think it's ubiquitous. I think that every beaver has it.
Mhm.
So, if they stay downstream of the dams, it doesn't much matter. I mean, it might affect downstream users. There are some water withdrawals, mostly, as I understand it, bank filtration, so they probably wouldn't have to deal with cysts. But from our end, it could be a pretty substantial water quality impact if we got a population big enough on the up dam side of the reservoirs.
Can
I can
we
just
look
share-
into that? Because I got to say, I know, Larry, you've mentioned that a number of times before, but deer, coyotes, rodents all carry Giardia. And
Right,
so-
but they're not aquatic.
Yeah, they
don't live in the water.
I mean, it is so close to the water, that whether we think that this would be a substantial new increase or it's already there. We're already treating for it. We already have to assume that. Is that going to change at all our practices of treating water? Because whether the beaver are there, we're still going to be treating for a number of different things. So it's a fair point. Water quality is a primary purpose and intent of our district. So we want to not get that wrong, but it'd be great to understand whether this would be an actual issue of concern or whether it's already there. We're already treating for it. And so consequently, it wouldn't be a substantial impact to the district from that perspective.
We are treating for it, but as you increase the density of the input, then it's become statistical. How many of them get through the treatment? It isn't 100%. It isn't, the filters are not a solid barrier. They are a porous media. So it's not like you have a swimming pool filter with a cartridge where it's a surface filter. This is a depth filter. So if you keep pouring Giardia in, it eventually will come through. The second part of that is they are very resistant to chlorination. So our only real technique of disinfection isn't very effective against them, because that's what the cyst does. It stays in that form, which is basically like an egg. Think of it like an egg with an eggshell. And you chlorinate, but you chlorinate the outside. It doesn't go inside, and it doesn't kill the cyst. The way that analysis is done is that they use mice. They infect them, and in the ileum, which is the portion of the digestive system between the stomach and the intestine, they actually have to go in and see if the ileum is growing these particular cysts. So the Giardia is a really big deal. And I don't know the answer about density, but it's only logical to me.
So on this issue, it has come up a couple times, and we're headed, it looks like, for a watch position, which means we'll be coming back to the board. So let staff take a look at this and see what's out there in terms of literature. Certainly is. I mean, I was thinking both points of view before they were stated, that obviously it is in the watershed, but it is about mass, often in pollutants. And in this case, it could well be. So anyway, we'll take a look at it. When we bring it back, we'll try and share what we find.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly note that there are watersheds that have reservoirs with beavers in their streams. I worked in Napa for many years, and we had a growing population of beavers. We never saw them upstream of the reservoirs. And we mapped them throughout the entire system. And so there are management techniques that can be put in place, especially by a district like us that's so engaged in Lagunitas Creek. And you have to think that if you were to be reintroducing a species like this in this watershed, there's tremendous amount of habitat that hasn't been utilized yet. So it's going to be a slow growth if they ever come back. With that, that's the 3 items that we had tonight. And so we'll take any comments beyond what we've had. Otherwise, we'll bring those 2 items back to a future meeting as these evolve through the legislative process.
I also want to check if we have any public comments on this item. Barry?
There are none.
Okay. Ben?
So I guess President Cush, you could do it either way. Since we're recommending a watch position, that is a formal position to take. So the board could vote on that, and that formally directs staff to come back and to monitor the bill.
I think that's, I mean, there's a lot of interest in this topic, right?
yeah.
So I would recommend that.
That we
Okay.
take a position.
Yes.
So we may want to vote.
Who will make the motion and second?
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, then Terry.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Director Sampson.
Yes.
President Cush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Just a point of clarification, did we just vote to watch just the Assembly Bill 2196, or was it also 2257?
No.
It was only for one, but it's interesting. I was going to bring up the other one because
Because I think
essentially it
we-
is a watch as well.
Yes.
Which I'd be
So-
fine with as well. So do you
Right,
want
yeah, no, so the board did consider at a later date AB 2257, and that's what we voted on.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So
that's what we-
functionally, it's a watch.
it's- yeah.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
great.
I assume you're going to Aqua?
Yes, I will be going to the conference, but I'll likely check in with them on the timing and, try to learn a little bit more about where we are with this one before the conference. The conference isn't until May, so
I know, but it's only a month.
that's true.
But
Month and a half.
I would guess there's going to be discussion about this particular item.
I would
meeting.
expect there would be, although I think it's probably a bit of, this in particular in the Legal Affairs Committee, there was, a lot of discussion at the last session when it didn't actually get through. And there's a lot of support. And so maybe it will come up that it's, they will be urging, I suspect, to support it. And in particular, the administrative record piece, I actually encourage that they keep that in the legislation when I was, during that discussion, because that was something that the district was experiencing directly. What is the appropriate scope of information in front of a court when there's a Proposition 218 water rates challenge? So,
That was one of our positions, right, in the lawsuit.
well, there was an
They didn't do
extensive
that.
amount of work that we did with respect to one of our lawsuits regarding just what was the appropriate scope, whether discovery was appropriate, whether depositions would be appropriate. This bill would clarify that for the courts.
Is the court bound by that? If it's passed as a law, huh?
Yes, if it's statutory, they're bound by it.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you, JP. We'll transition then to agenda item 8C, recycled water update.
So good evening, Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director. I'm joined with Lucy Croy, a Water Quality Manager. Lucy's going to be pulling up our recycled water update presentation this evening. And as we're doing that, I think as we go through the slides tonight, one of the things I think will become obvious as we look at our recycled water opportunities in our service area, there's some key kind of attributes that you're going to notice on Purple Pipe. Right, that's recycled water for irrigation or other uses, as opposed to IPR and DPR. So those pipe projects that we look at, you'll notice the total volume of water opportunities that we have to offset is quite small. And then as we look at more sizable opportunities for water recycling in the form of IPR, that's indirect potable reuse, and direct potable reuse, those volumes are quite a bit higher. But there's some inherent challenges that we'll see tonight with those particular options. So Lucy will walk us through those slides.
Thank you. Good evening. Board Directors, Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager. Tonight I'll be going through an overview of our recycled water system and expansion projects. Last November, we went through a similar presentation of our recycled water system and expansion projects and potable reuse. And tonight is a brief update on those opportunities and potable reuse, the regulations around potable reuse. So a bit of background. The core of our recycled water system is located in the Lucas Valley area in San Rafael. Our first pilot treatment plant was actually built just around the really severe drought of 1976, 1977. And it's adjacent to Las Colinas Valley Sanitary District over on the right-hand side of the map. And that relationship with Las Colinas has been core to our program over the years. So we've been working with them from the beginning. And then in 2019, they upgraded their facilities to produce more water, and we have become a distributor. So we now distribute water through the purple pipelines that you can see. The map's a little bit hard to see the terrain, but we purchase water from Las Colinas, and they are the treatment. They treat the recycled water. Our current demand as of the last few years is around 700 acre feet, and that comes from 350 customers, mostly for irrigation, toilet flushing, HVAC cooling towers, kind of an assortment of uses. And then we also run a year-round commercial truck hauling program for dust control, compaction, and construction. sewer cleaning and street cleaning and irrigation. And our staff train anybody that's interested and wants to use that program and pick up water for free. And all of this is run through our recycled water system. That's a separate infrastructure of 25 miles of distribution pipeline, 3 pump stations and 2 storage tanks. And ways to expand the system we've looked at from the 25 miles would be to first infill, so add new customers within the 25 miles. And sometimes we have those opportunities come up with customers that are either adding to the system or changing their use. And we find opportunities to transition them over to recycled water. And then other opportunities are expanding our recycled water system either through a phased or project-based approach. So just kind of beyond the bounds of our recycled water system. And then lastly, adding a new recycled water system centered off a different treatment plant. So we're centered off Las Colinas, so either through Central Marin or SASM down in Mill Valley.
Let's see, if for infill, do we have available capacity? If we,
Yes, we do. With the new recycled water facility that Las Colinas upgraded, we do have quite a bit of capacity that they can produce from their treatment plants, and we're able to meet any kind of infill right now. So as I mentioned, our partnership with Las Colinas has been ongoing since our inception in 1976. And then in addition, we are always looking at ways to expand the system and use the other wastewater facilities in our service area. So we've partnered with SASM's Sewage Agency of Southern Marin and Mill Valley in 2014, and then Central Marin Sanitation Agency, CMSA, in 2015 and 2022 to look at feasibility studies for recycled water and look at projects that would be cost effective or the most cost effective in those areas, building off their treatment facilities. And we continue to look for those opportunities to expand the recycled water system, mostly through leveraging grants and these partnerships with the wastewater agencies. So as I mentioned, there's infill, which is within our system, or there's also starting to look beyond. So phased expansion is one approach that we've looked at over the years, kind of growing through a phased expansion to become more cost effective in how we grow the system. The purple in the north part of this map is our existing system, and the blue would be a expansion phase of 1 through 10 that was looked at in a feasibility study first done in 2000 and updated over the years. And in that first section, in the blue section, all of that together, the offset demand would be about 345 acre feet with a pipe length of 24 miles. And so with that in 2023, cost for capital cost would be around 60 million is what we estimate. So you can see what the estimated cost per acre feet is or so. And so what we see is that it's expensive due to the residential nature of our county to expand beyond the boundaries of where our system is right now. But we continue to look for opportunities. So another way we go about it is looking at projects.
Lucy, another interruption. I always get confused on the calculation of annual cost per acre foot. So some in there, the capital costs are being amortized over the lifetime of the system, and then you're also including the operating costs.
Correct. So over 30 years, I think it's the 3.5% or so. So based on what we would expect we could get.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, project-based is another way we've looked at it to see if it becomes more cost-effective to move into, finding a way to expand the system, looking at smaller projects. But as you see with these are 4 that we've picked out. Even Peacock Gap is down at the bottom. That's moving out towards the Peacock Gap golf course, 285 acre feet. The capital cost to get the pipeline all the way out there is over 26 million. And that was done just in the last 2 years. And the annual cost is over $6,000 per acre foot.
Is that assuming the causeway that the park people asked? That's not, that's just.
No, No, that ended up being the most cost-effective option that they looked at in that design study with, I believe it was West Yost, and the most cost-effective one ended up being going through Central Marin and then over along San Pedro. And that was because they could pick up the most users. And I think the causeway ended up not being feasible because the state park said they wouldn't allow for it.
I thought they were the ones that asked for it to avoid the Indian
Yeah,
burial.
they liked the idea of the causeway. They were not so keen in us going overland to the Peacock Gap tank that we proposed to use. So there are some mixed messages there.
So another way that we've looked at increasing recycled water use is to build off of a different treatment plant, wastewater agency. So this is showing one option coming off CMSA, which is down closer to the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, and using their treatment facilities, taking their effluent, building recycled water facilities as needed to move water over to, say, San Quentin was the preferred alternative that came out of the feasibility study with CMSA in 2015. And so the demand offset that was available with that study was around 150 acre feet for a capital cost of 11.4 million. And that's been updated as well to kind of current costs. So bringing all of these together, what you can see is there's definitely the possibility to expand and to increase recycled water use. But it comes with a cost, with very expensive capital costs to do these projects. And they're very supply limited in consideration of the water supply roadmap that we're working on and the supply demand that we're looking for overall. And so that's also why we're starting to just keep in mind the future of potable reuse. So with potable reuse, I'll step into now a brief overview of there's two primary categories. There's indirect potable reuse, which is the planned use of recycled water to replenish drinking water supplies, but using an environmental buffer. And that primarily comes through either a groundwater basin as the environmental buffer or a surface water reservoir as the buffer. And it's held with either a dilution or a amount of time where it's put in that buffer. For us, in Marin, there are no available groundwater basins that seem feasible, so we don't see groundwater recharge as a good option. But surface water augmentation is an option to look into. And so the project that we've evaluated is doing an IPR project, moving water, collecting it from actually Las Colinas and SASM, moving it to CMSA. It's a bit hard to see on this map, but basically bringing it to the middle, treating it all there at CMSA. So building an advanced water purification facility, and then building the pipeline. It's a new pipeline, building a pipeline all the way to Kent Lake, where you would then store the treated water, the treated recycled water in Kent Lake for an amount of time where it would then be considered okay to drink. And the annual yield that we have calculated and evaluated is around 7 MGD or 7,800 acre feet, and that's primarily based on the capacity of the wastewater agencies. But what you can see here with the table that's down at the bottom, some of the calculations are based on using that water continuously and running the treatment plants continuously. But as we know, right now our reservoirs are spilling. And so we likely would want to use the water more intermittently. So we've also evaluated this, looking at it more on an intermittent basis and what would be the cost associated with running a treatment plant on that level at that frequency.
Either getting rid of the infiltration at CSMA or putting in desal?
I believe it does,
Which,
because we would need to build an advanced water purification facility.
but you
At
didn't do that
CMS.
anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to filter before you reclaim.
Right.
But the problem with their water is it's about 2,500 TDS.
Right.
And
It's
they've been resistant to fixing their infiltration.
Yeah, the primary capital cost here is most of it is actually pipeline to get it out to Kent Lake. But there's I think it's about 150, 200 that's dedicated to treatment upgrades at CMSA to get it to that level. Okay, moving on to direct potable reuse. This is the topic that is more covered in the news right now. This is the planned introduction of purified recycled water, either raw water augmentation or treated water augmentation. I tend to think of DPR as treated water augmentation more directly. That's where it's put directly into the distribution system, but there is raw water augmentation where it's also put into a raw water supply immediately upstream of a treatment plant. So the graphic on the side shows it as well. And so either of these have also been evaluated as well for Marin. And when I came in November, I think it was the ops meeting in November, the draft regulations were underway. They had a public comment period. And this California State Water Resources Control Board did adopt the regulations in December, so December 19th. They were estimating at that time that the effective date would be the second quarter of 2024. There hasn't been much updated on the website yet, so we'll see where it goes from here, but I expect it'll take some time for them to get caught up. So as I mentioned, raw water augmentation is one option of DPR, and this looks like very similar to what I just showed with the IPR, but basically moving it to a lake where it doesn't have as much detention time. So it's a shorter detention time. It doesn't have to meet the same constraints that IPR has. So this is showing the costs associated with moving water, collecting it, treating it, and moving it to Bontempi, where it would then be treated again at Bontempi treatment plant and sent out to our distribution system. And we have similar numbers as far as demand and estimated capital cost. And running it continuous and intermittent shows quite a bit of variety based on our needs.
Lucy, just one question. Is that demand or available supply?
It's available supply, demand. I use them kind of the same, but it would be supply. It's based on how much availability on the wastewater from the wastewater agencies. So, and then treated water augmentation. This is what is more classically understood to be DPR. And this would be taking water from CMSA. This is a close-up of CMSA's treatment plant near the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, and building an advanced water purification facility at that really much on top of any free land space that they have at the site. And treating water up to 4 million gallons per day. And this has not been updated, but this would be meeting now the adopted DPR treatment requirements. And you can see the capital cost would be much lower because there's no pipelines moving the water, conveying the water, and we'd still be able to use the same infrastructure within our distribution system. We're not building a second pipeline that's secondary to our potable system. But again, there's high costs associated with running it intermittently since running it intermittently due to can you jump in?
Yeah, so what Lucy's trying to get out is basically that, right, our need for this water, a couple weeks ago, it was raining cats and dogs. We wouldn't be operating an advanced water treatment plant while we're spilling 60,000 acre feet of water from our reservoirs. We would be waiting until the summertime period or something like that. So you might be operating it only on a third of the time basis. So that's what she means by intermittent. And I think I would challenge you to find another treatment technology to strap onto this. There's just a general feeling, and Ben can jump in and attest to this, but the large agencies that are looking at this as a key element of their water supply kind of feel like California maybe has gone a little too stringent in terms of some of these regulations. So it'll be interesting to see how and watch how those develop over the years.
Yeah, I had mentioned, I was at the reuse conference last week, and I was talking to Metropolitan Water, that is the big player in California water, the biggest, and has a program with LA County Sand District, the biggest wastewater player. I was just asking, there was a presentation after the deputy director of operations. I asked her, what really are your plans on DPR? Well, what are you going to do? I mean, it all sounds great, and it's looks like 15 years down the road. What her response was is they're going to do a lot of research, their own research, to prove that the California regs are too stringent. They're 2 to 3x more stringent than other states, and they've concluded it's not practical or affordable, but they also believe with their big research team, they'll be able to make headway to better shape the regulations. So it'll be very interesting watching how the industry evolves, how the regs evolve, and how the technologies evolve over time.
So in summary, expansion of Purple Pipe is definitely possible and comes with costs. It's capital intensive, and from what we've seen, it's supply limited, mostly because of the way mostly because of the way that our community is built, with it being highly residential, and we don't have any large anchor tenants that are industrial. And then with potable reuse, those opportunities down the road will be cost intensive and extremely complex, but will be interesting to see where it goes from here. And so where we stand is we look forward to continuing to monitor the regulations and larger agencies, as Ben mentioned, and see how the regulations may change in a few years, and where we end up down the road, and what our options are in the next few years.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. Good update. I'm sure there are going to be some good questions and comments. Larry?
Well, it's unfortunate we don't have Jason Dow here, because I think Jason would say there's no space at CSMA for anything like this. I suppose it could be built into an elevated structure or eat their parking lot. It's one or the other.
It is.
So obviously he was a key partner in that
Sure.
DPR study that we did with CMSA, and it's a multi-story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that you didn't mention is that the users, if you were to go to DPR, the user would immediately know that this was happening because of temperature. Our water is pretty cold, our cold water, and sewage is pretty warm, and treated sewage is even warmer. So it's kind of cold, hot, and tepid, if you think of it that way. So by the temperature alone, the user would immediately spot that they were getting DPR. Now, that's life, perhaps, but I think when we had this conversation, a serious conversation about San Quentin, two things came out about it that I can recall clearly. One was that the prisoners' union would sue us. And the second was that the community of San Quentin, which are those half a dozen houses on the road into the prison on the Bayside, absolutely did not want whatever was going to the prison. They wanted the water they have. Now, fortunately, that's not as complicated as it sounds, because you just leave the infrastructure as is and bring in new infrastructure. But that tank on the hill there, the one that belongs to the state, as you come into Sir Francis Drake, if you look up, you'll see a big tank that feeds San Quentin. That's a pretty touchy area. So keep that in the back of the mind, that this is not as easy as it seems. It's one of the few questions I've had since I've been on the board, is something to this effect: cocktail party conversation. You're not really going to do that, right? And I don't, my constituents don't seem to have much feeling about those issues, but they did have a feeling about this one. So, you know, it's one of those things that sounds good and it is good. And in certain areas, it's been very, very good. Orange County, of course, the one that everyone knows about, is kind of a special situation because they were using sewage, treated sewage as a barrier to saltwater intrusion. So their situation is a little different. They did set the motion forward with reverse osmosis. They set that vision that you had to have this kind of barrier in order to put that kind of system in. So that probably started the thinking. And when I talked to Chemungos about this, George's opinion was that the new standards would have no impact whatsoever on enhancement or advancement of DPR in California because they're so involved and so restrictive that it's just not really feasible except for a few unusual situations like San Diego and a few others.
Thanks for the presentation. A couple of questions that would be helpful for me. So Las Colinas, I think, was built in the mid 80s. Is that right? Around 84. Does anyone know?
Don't actually know. I think it was there in the 70s, actually.
It's older than
I
that.
think, yeah, it was there in the 70s because we were using an old Nike missile vault.
I think it's older than that.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had a treatment plant there from at least 80.
Yeah, it's a Kennedy plant, I think.
Cool. Well, that further, I guess,
Yeah.
helps my point. And how much does it cost us to produce water from there? If it costs us $300 or $400 an acre foot in our reservoirs, and we pay $1,200 or so to Sonoma, getting water out of Las Colinas, how expensive is that?
It's jumped around a little bit, but right now we're averaging probably around $600 per acre foot.
600. So
Does that include the financing?
Um,
So
No.
we were talking about upgrading that recycled water
Right.
treated water facility. So the water district, us, contributed to that expansion. And so there's a capital cost associated with the water. So we
So
need to
I
get
think
back to you.
as I'm thinking about it, if you know, thank goodness they produced that water for us because that's saving us quite a bit of money right now. We're north of 30 years into using that capital investment that some very thoughtful people made years ago. And if we were to make some of these other investments, that's saving us $3 million per year right now, compared to some of the other recycled water opportunities. That does help give us resiliency in drought and helps other ways beyond just the cost to give us some insurance against future issues. I guess my next question is how much does it cost to get new customers? How many more customers do you think we can get to use that? How much effort are we putting into expanding that demand?
In terms of infill?
Yeah.
So infill rely on, somebody doing a remodel, something like that, and having an appropriate use within the building. There's a lot of regulations on internal plumbing for recycled water. So it's kind of on a case by case basis. And I couldn't tell you it's much more than a half a dozen to a dozen new candidate sites per year that come up.
Can you pull up the slide where you showed the options for IPR that had, I think it was about 5 or 6 different considerations and the approximate cost and annual cost?
for
For the, I think tertiary.
Yeah.
The expansion of the
So
purple
yeah,
pipe.
I think it's like that one there.
Yeah.
So as I'm looking at these considerations for us to continue to research, and given our water roadmap that we have approved to continue to look at this, and especially to find new grant money, I am supportive of us pursuing the SASM effort, that we can look into how those customers, whether Mill Valley or SASM, could potentially benefit and potentially contribute. whether there might be additional state or federal funds to help us do that project. I think the costs that you have here are more expensive than some of the other options that we're looking at, but they also, I don't think necessarily take into account insurance against drought, where we were scrambling before and we were coming up with extraordinarily expensive solutions that may not take into account other additional infill expansions that that site has beyond Friends Field and Bayfront Park, potentially to the Redwoods, which is nearby, and other developments, or the high school, which is also not that far away, which has some big fields, which I do not believe was using it. So I do think there are some further explorations that we could have here, and I would like us to make some efforts to continue our recycled water work. I also think there might be interest in San Quentin and some of the other and Peacock. I think there could be opportunities in Peacock in particular, for public, private, and other nonprofit support for that effort that may reduce the costs. And I wouldn't mind us reopening those conversations, which I think could be mutually beneficial for a lot of people, potentially the canal as well. One more point. That's it. I good.
Great. Thank you, Jed. Monty?
It'd be really helpful. I mean, when we look at this, so much of it, I'm wondering is, at what point would we, at some point in time, I believe that recycled water or DPR will be part of our future, and substantially so. I think it's a question of when is the technology ready and commensurate with standards and other things. And it sounds like what we're still saying is that we're not there yet, is my own personal interpretation. But it would be really helpful to, things that could change my perspective on this would be understanding to what extent these costs that we're looking at might be costs that we wouldn't bear if we were able to get grant funding. If grant funding would substantially cover the cost of capital construction, that could really change these numbers. The annual operating cost is not something that we're going to get grant funded. So separating those costs out would help understand, I think for me at least, how these things might change. And then of course it'd be really helpful to understand how, from experts, which I'm sure many people here are, how the technology is evolving. Like, do we feel like there's a chance that it will significantly be changing in the coming years, or are we not really seeing much advancement? It's a crystal ball question a little bit. I want to echo what Jed said in terms of similar to grants are the private-public partnerships. I know that Peacock Gap has been very interested in talking with us about how to meet their needs with recycled water. The gap in cost here is still big enough that it's not competitive with other alternatives that we should be pursuing as a cost-effective means. But, if further conversations and exploration can change that, that's I think worthy of consideration. I also think that CMSA, I wonder to what extent, whether, as Larry brought up, the space consideration issues are really, I don't want to say are they a deal breaker, but is the fix more add to the cost in a way that really makes it prohibitive? I also worry a little bit about sea level rise issues with that location, and other implications that could have with that site. But otherwise, it seems like it's in a good location to be a source of recycled water, or maybe in the future, DPR.
Thanks, Monty. Matt?
Thank you both for the presentation. For me, it's really important to stay updated on the recycled piece, because it seems like not only topic du jour, but also really some areas we can start focusing in on that would make a difference for our supply for that. For me, I'm looking at this almost two tracks. There's the DPR, IPR this way, and then tertiary. Starting with the DPR, IPR, it sounds like one, regulations aren't completely out yet, kind of a big deal, but the other part of it is the technology piece there. Is there some partnerships there with the wastewater agencies? And then the elephant in the room is where do we put it in the winter? So if we have a storage component that is increasing as part of the next presentation, now I think we can start looking at some possible synergies that would start making sense for that, especially when it's dry all winter. And we have plenty of storage to be able to fill up. So thank you for continuing to track that. It's appreciated, especially in the light of recent news that local wastewater agencies are getting fined based on algae growth in the Bay Area due to over discharge, and they're really looking for ways to reduce their discharge. And so there's some motivation, I think, at this point to partner with us, or at least partner at some point as we move forward to those regulations. Flipping now to the tertiary system, I think, to echo what Jed said, there are some really smart people a long time ago that built this system, and they've unfortunately limited it to north of Portoswallow Hill and the tail end of Lucas Valley. But without that piece, we would be restricted now or be behind the 8 ball when these big developments are going in. We're seeing the Northgate Mall come into play. We're seeing the one on Los Gamos. Both will be tapping into this. There's also quite a bit of talk on the St. Vincent's property, the Mary Silvera Ranch, and a bunch of other infill things that I think that should be considered in this. And we shouldn't be looking at this in terms of 2024. We should be looking at it for the next decade, because that's what we're really planning for these big capital improvement projects. And I think you'll see a significant demand potentially, or at least some support of additional housing in the county, because we can support it with this secondary form of water, whether it's landscape, multifamily housing, developing that piece. So I think it's important for that because, and also too, not to look at it from, we don't need to have these massive projects right away. I think they can be incremental because every little bit counts on this as we continue to prepare. And the redundancy and resiliency piece is really important too. I mean, we have a secondary hydrant system in northern San Rafael. We see the failure when the earth moves to our neighbors in the county of the south. They put in a secondary hydrant system just for that in the early 1900s to combat. So it's a really nice resiliency piece on that same piece. And then looking at the Southern Marin one as well as the Central Marin one, but the Southern Marin one, if there's some opportunity there, and it is a little bit more expensive per acre foot, we have some partnership opportunities and we can reduce our overall demand. I'd like to support that as well.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Paul and Lucy, I was mentioning at the retreat last Thursday that, one of the concerns is the ability to operate these systems intermittently. Is that even, is that something that's common with these types of treatment trains, reverse osmosis?
I wouldn't say it's common, no. It can be done. It's not that it can't be done. It's a process where membranes, and you got to remember these plants, what we're talking about, not sort of a half a dozen membranes. There are hundreds of membranes and membrane elements. So tubes containing 3-4 different elements. And you've got to pickle all of them in a special solution to prevent bacterial growth, monitor that every month to make sure that something hasn't gone wrong with the process. And then when time comes to operate again, it's a flush and then a retesting and proving of that system. And you kind of hope that it comes back to the same efficiencies that you had previously. It's a challenging process to put a plant to bed. If you've ever mothballed even a very simple plant, let alone an advanced water treatment facility.
And that's probably, as we talk about technology advancements, your question, that's probably an area that's going to be pursued, because today I would say we wouldn't have the confidence to pickle it. What Paul's describing, we'd probably continuously operate it. So today we'd be operating it to spill the water because it's a complex plant and you would want it available when you need it in a drought. So most likely you're operating this very energy chemical intensive operation today as we're spilling and right all through the winter. So that's really the higher cost, whether you're pickling or you're operating it, that would even drive the cost higher because you'd have all the energy. But yeah, it's tough to fit it into our need, which is a once every 3, 4, 5 years. It's very difficult.
So yeah, I think then I'll also just, if we could even note on the slide for future activities, that technology watch. So, I'm sure these things are going to take a long time to emerge, but if we have a sense that within 10 years, there will be treatment technologies that are going to be more amenable to intermittent operations, less costly, less energy intensive. We could be putting some of the other pieces together so that we're ready to benefit when they do come online. So
I'd just like to say, you know, if something that could substantially change things are grants, you know, and where with new initiatives like this, there's often public funding that is there for early adopters to get people to take things on. But are you catching a falling knife? So I think it's great that obviously we need to keep an eye on it, and if there were ever something that reached a no regrets level, that would be, I think it'd be great for us to continue to move in that direction. It's kind of almost stating the obvious, but I think it's really a matter of timing. And again, like, are there public funding opportunities that can help defray the costs where something becomes competitive, because these are drought resilient water supplies, which come at a higher cost. And so we shouldn't be comparing them to our costs out of our current lakes, because it's a different thing. So drought resilient water supplies are going to cost a lot more.
thanks, Monty. Public comments, Terry?
Yes, we have several. The first speaker is Mr. Phil Sauter, and then Mr. Ed Jamison and Larry Menegas.
Thanks for the presentation. That was really informative. I didn't see it on the website today, so these comments might be a little outdated. But at 230 million gallons annually, or 630,000 gallons a day, it looks like the district's recycled water use is about 2.5 to 3% of its total water use. On a per capita basis, that's about 3 gallons per capita per day. I tried to get an idea of how that compares with other water districts in the state. Irvine Ranch Water District, while not a good match for Marin Water, meets 28% of their water demands with recycled water. It's their rationale for using as much recycled water as possible that caught my attention. They say recycled water extends our drinking water supplies, reduces the need for additional drinking water facilities, reduces the amount of treated sewage discharged into the ocean, reduces our reliance on expensive imported water, and increases our water supply reliability. It's a drought-proof source of water. While they focus on large industrial scale customers, they also make recycled water available for private estate-sized lots. I thought that might be a good marketing hook here in Marin. Valley Water in Santa Clara County has a goal of using 10% recycled water by next year. They're considering using it for drinking water by treating recycled water to a purified standard and then using it to replenish groundwater. It won't be sent directly to a potable water treatment plant. North Marin Water District has constructed about 17 miles of pipeline with 92 connections. The recycled water system includes pipelines in 3 service areas and distributes 92 million gallons annually. Recycled water is 6% of that district's water volume, according to their website. I thought it was interesting that with less than half of our recycled water volume, they've managed to justify and build 17 miles of distribution pipeline to our 25 miles. No matter how I look at it, Marin, both in terms of supply and in terms of distribution, was once a leader, but I don't think that's true any longer. We're more of a follower in the use of recycled water. And looking at tonight's presentation, it looks like all the expansion plans would bring us up to about 7% of our water being recycled water. You probably all know that the governor's goal is 800,000 acre feet of recycled water by 2030. That translates to 18 gallons per capita today. If Marin met that goal, we'd be at 15% of our total water supply. And Newsom's goal is to double that amount by 2040. Putting back on my conservation hat, I can't help but notice that if we met the state's goals for recycled water, we'd net about 3 million gallons more additional water, or 3/4 of the way to the 4 million gallon savings that we'd like to see. I
Thank you,
think that,
Mr. Sauter. 3 minutes are up. Mr. Ed Jamison, please.
Yes, thanks. I believe the existing recycled water availability from Las Colinas is already several times the present demand. Some of these projects are shown costing $4,000 to $5,000 an acre foot with continuous operations. But as Lucy said, since we spill water almost every year, the water would be worthless in most years with prohibitively high true costs. But I believe the cost would be far higher than using these intermittently 1/3 of the time. We'd only value them in drought, perhaps 1/10 of the time, or most likely even less. So multiply those 1/3 usage costs by at least 3 times more, or 9 times the continuous cost, and likely much more as the true cost of this supplemental water. So maybe $40,000 per acre foot, or even much more. Most of these alternatives appear to be non-starters. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Larry Menikis, please, and then Miss Marilyn Price.
Yes, good evening. Unfortunately, I'm coming a little late to the meeting as I had another board meeting to attend, but I have followed the presentation and I'm going to go listen to the video. What I do want to add to this is that recycled water and potable reuse is part of a fairly complex matrix that the board is looking at, that board and staff is looking at, and it's one possible piece of the puzzle. But the piece of the puzzle that should be included here should be regional desal, so that you can really do a comparative. They're cousins to each other. They're not exactly the same, recycled water and potable reuse, but they're not very far away. And I think that would give a better decision-making tree here in terms of future possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Marilyn Price.
Well, what I can say, I wish I could get into all the details like you all do and feel it's above my head, I'm sorry to say, but I just look at it as a generalist, and everything, as I've said, that I read today is, you know, we do need to conserve more. We need to live, as we've said before, with it.
Oh, you muted yourself, Miss Price. Go ahead.
Now can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And I am in favor of reuse of everything, including water, as much as is possible. But I also see the difficulties and the challenges that you all face. We don't know the future. I feel like the future is going to be something that the saving of water, reuse of water, figuring out, you know, how we can do this in Marin is something that we will need to do. And I am very pleased that you all are looking ahead. I hear this figure of 10 years ahead. You know, we definitely have to do that and figure out as we go along. But I do hope that we can get our residents, every one of them, to conserve their water. We need to live like that just almost permanently into the 21st century and beyond, maybe. So, at any rate, I am applauding what you all are doing, and thank you for being there.
Thank you, Miss Price. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then we'll move to agenda.
I have a
item-
couple of more comments.
Okay, Larry.
I think that you should add the Meadow Club to that table because they are working on alternatives. You can put a TBD on the cost, you know, on both the operating cost and the capital cost, but I think they should be added to that. And I think that I was thinking about Peacock Gap. It's probably competitive to desalt the water from the Dutra quarry, which is much closer to the golf course. I'm sure my fellow board members have never been told this issue. Part of the Peacock Gap is we turn over one of our water tanks to reclaim water. There's a water tank near the golf course, and it changes the whole distribution system down there. But that was part of the deal, was converting that guy. Now, if they were to desal that water, I think, you know, you mentioned we don't have industrial clients, which is true, except for San Quentin, but we do have golf courses, and the golf courses are, you know, substantial amounts of water. They're targets. Mill Valley has a golf course that would benefit from this. The Meadow Club, Peacock Gap. I think that even the city of San Rafael is one that would benefit. Their water bills are pretty high. I remember them complaining about them. Irrigating parks or some grass. Now, you could argue they shouldn't have grass. That's a different issue. But I think that, you know, we need to keep looking up with this because there's a lot of things going on. I don't particularly agree with your comment, Phil, that we're a follower here. I think what happened is we capitalized on the demand that was available. And I don't know if you guys have seen this. There's a map that shows 9 areas of reclaimed water. I asked the first day on the board, how we doing with that map? And one of the areas was done at that point, which is the one you have in purple. And you asked the question today, one of those areas is done. So, and I believe we have a condition like the sewers have. If you have reclaimed water available, you have to use it for irrigation. So if it goes past your property, you don't have an option. Non-single family homes, just commercial. So we have moved forward in this. It's just that the next step is a giant one, and it's very pricey. And Ed Jameson's right too. The costs are high. And keep in mind, the one thing that's really different about this and desal is that the total organic carbon, even in the best wastewater, is going to be pushing 10. The ocean, the bay is probably 1 or 2. And total organic carbon is a measure of the organic materials that are left behind. That makes it extremely hard to stabilize the RO membranes when they have high TOC water in them.
It'd be great. I think, Larry, it'd be great maybe if we could pick some of this up in the next update. I'm going through our next PowerPoint. It's a long one. So,
Okay.
yeah, I think we should move on to the next update, which is on our water supply roadmap local storage project. Thank you, Lucy.
Okay, good evening. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to members of our local storage enhancement team. I would read their bios, but it's already 8:15 and it would probably take us till 9 o'clock to get through the bios. All kidding aside, we're lucky to have some very experienced engineers on our side, and we've got Glenn Roussel, who the board met last September, and Robert Bob McManus, who probably knows more about dams than anybody I've ever met. So, and of course, you're familiar with Xavier Arias with Woodard and Curran. So with those brief remarked introductions, I assure you we have the necessary expertise here tonight to answer any question I think that could come up with what we're going to be talking about. So our process tonight, do have a lot of slides. They're all pictures. So it can be nice and light, but it's going to hopefully be entertaining. So with a very brief introduction, we're going to get into the process the team's working through and give you sort of a pencils down update on where we're at with the findings that we're coming up with at this point. And then we'll just close with a last slide on summary and next steps. So very briefly then, of course, how do we get here? The drought, big rainfall, storms filled us up, gave us the time to kind of back away from the emergency intertie and consider this roadmap that the board adopted last February. And now tonight we're going to be focusing on this red circled box of local storage enlargement. And I know folks may be watching online or even attending in the audience, and even though I'm not talking about many things that we're doing right now, just in the interest of time, we're going to be focusing on this local storage enhancement. But I assure you, water conservation is first and foremost in our minds, even though it may be at the bottom of the slide. We just heard a presentation on recycled water and heard the board's comments with respect to partnerships, grants, and just game-changing things that we need to find to make some of those projects move. So we are interested. We're moving in all of these areas on the roadmap as quickly as we can. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Guylaine to walk us through the next couple slides.
Thank you, Paul.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. If you recall, the local process, the process we're going to go through for local storage evaluation is first we are going to define the alternatives as they were described in your strategic plan, but define them to the point that we can screen them down to 3 or 4. And then we'll further develop these shortlisted alternatives to conceptual design. And based on that, we'll come back to you with a proposed preferred alternative for design. So in terms of the progress to date, as I mentioned, we are defining the concept laid out in the strategic water supply assessment and to feed it to screening of the alternatives to the top 3 or 4. We have done site visits. We have reviewed all the records. And our purpose there was to understand the geometry of the existing dams and the spillways and the opportunities for enlargement and expansion, as well as understand the construction material availability and characteristics. Are there any more materials that we can use to build these dams? And then we evaluated the local geology and the geologic hazard. We established limits for the new inundated areas, the incremental inundated areas, and then we defined site constraints. And that process led us to actually identify new alternatives and as well as sub-alternatives. So Bob will go through these in a minute, but this is what we're going to be looking at. We have Solothule, of course, but we have 2 options for Solothule now. We have Kent. We came up with Alpine as a new possible alternative, and that came about when we actually were looking at spillway gates for Alpine, and that's how we came up with the opportunity to raise Alpine. We talk about Nicasio. Then the new reservoir construction, Devil's Gulch, Halleck, but also Upper Nicasio. This is a new reservoir to the northwest of the existing reservoir. And then we'll also touch on new spillway gates, in particular Nicasio. But we're also going to look at Solothule, Kent, and Alpine. So with that, Bob.
Good evening, board members. Can you hear me okay? All right, we're going to start with Solothule, and just a quick recap what the existing facility looks like. This dam was built in 1979, so fairly modern construction. And just some common elements we'll talk about in the other dams. Of course, every dam needs to have a spillway. These are usually put in one of the abutments of the dam. There's an inlet and outlet works. The inlet for Solothule is up here on the point. The outlet is down here at the pump station. And Solothule and the other embankment dams are what we call zoned embankment dams. So this darker outline is the existing Solothule. And there's internal structure to these dams. That's why they're called zones. There's coarse material on the outside, we typically call the shell. So this would be gravel or larger size rock and sand. And these provide stability and strength for the embankment. There's the water retaining part of the dam that's called the core. This is typically a clayey material with low permeability. Very often, you also have to seal the foundation under the core. So often there'll be a cutoff zone where they extend the depth down to good rock. And many of these dams also have a grout curtain. For raising Solothule, we first looked at a downstream only addition. The advantage of this kind of construction is you don't have to disturb the existing dam very much. You can keep the reservoir in operation while you're building the new dam only on the downstream side. So again, we have to have the same elements in addition to the core. There's drain material to help drain any water that does seep through the core, and that exits out to the toe. So all these elements have to be extended up in the new dam. And when you do the downstream only option, you can see that the crest of the dam, which used to be here, is now moved downstream quite a ways. That has an impact on the embankment that I'll show you in a second. It also puts the core out over new material. And For example, in a seismic event, if this material were to settle, that could compromise the core, lead to leaks. So that means that this downstream shell needs to be constructed very carefully. Oops, I went one too many. Yeah, so here's a model of the existing dam. I just wanted to show you the transition so you can see the difference of the new dam. I should have mentioned to raise Sulahuli to get the 20,000 acre foot target, we're looking at about 37 feet, I believe. 39 feet, 37 is Kent. So one thing to notice here, extending the embankment downstream, we're covering up the existing pump house. That would have to be relocated. You can kind of see that it's starting to bend around the abutment. And what happens is the original dam always takes the best real estate. And if you start to move things downstream, very often you'll see that the valley starts to widen out. And that means that the embankment becomes larger. It also forces the spillway out further into the hillside. So here's another alternative for Sulahuli, which is to balance the embankment, the new embankment, both upstream and downstream. The disadvantage of this is you have to drain the reservoir, and that obviously affects the operation and availability of the water, but allows for much more symmetrical design. And you can see the core here, the filters and the drains are much smaller. They're vertical, so they're not positioned over the new embankment. And you now have a thinner shell upstream and downstream. So here's what this balanced upstream downstream embankment could look like. You can see the pump house probably could be spared here just by putting a small retaining wall. So those facilities would not be affected. The cut for the spillway is much smaller because you have a better alignment for the new spillway. Here's just an upstream view of this upstream downstream dam. You can see the intake facility here probably would be affected in this scenario. And there's an old, the old dam, it's been breached, but if we were to drain the reservoir, this creates complications with sedimentation, providing IFR, things like that. So typically a cofferdam would be needed, and possibly the old dam could be used for that in the construction. Just comparing the upstream and upstream downstream options, so you can see how far downstream that the downstream only option moves the dam axis. Here's the inundation map for the new reservoir at the spillway level. And you can see the upper reaches of this reservoir. The terrain becomes pretty flat. So quite a bit of additional area would be inundated for Sulahuli. Here's Kent Reservoir, Peters Dam. And this dam has already been raised once. The original dam was built in the early 50s. This dam was raised in 79, 80, 81. So you can see the original spillway of the early dam is still in place. It's used as an outlet for the existing reservoir. The new spillway was moved up further on the abutment. So this is a pretty good example of what these other dam raises would look like. You'd have to have a new spillway, possibly using the old spillway for an outlet. Here's the cross section. You can see this is the original dam as the dark outline. And this dam was built, the raise was done only in the downstream direction. So you can see the original core was in here. The axis of the dam and crest. The existing crest is here. And if we were to continue to move this downstream with a downstream raise, the axis moves even further downstream. This is a big dam. It's a tall dam and pretty wide. So we're looking at a lot of material for this raise. Here's the existing embankment dam, the new and old spillway. This was the cut made for the spillway and also the quarry to provide material for the dam shell. And here's what the new 20,000 acre foot embankment would look like. A consequence of moving the axis so much further downstream is we've actually moved past the abutment ridge for the original two dams. And if you were to project this axis out, the dam would actually go out into this ravine and would have to be quite a bit larger. So what I've shown here is kind of turning the corner in the dam. This is a much more complicated type of dam to analyze, and the dam regulators, DSOD, might look more skeptically at this kind of arrangement. The spillway would go through this cut, and then since it's also entering this ravine, that would have to make a turn. So this new configuration is quite a bit more involved. Here's the Alpine Dam. What came to our attention was these steps in the dam, and these were mentioned in some of the early reports. And these steps were put in place so that the dam could be raised at a future date. The dam we're looking at here was completed around 1941. An earlier dam was in place here, originally built in 1918, raised 8 feet. In 1924, they just added some additional concrete to the top. And here's the 1941 addition. So again, the earlier dam had steps left in it to be raised. And this is the process for raising the dam that would kind of be duplicated if we raise it again. Here's a pretty wide.
How do the steps affect raising?
They give a purchase or a place. It's just a step for the new concrete to join with the old dam instead of having a flat surface. So here's a wider view. Here's the Alpine Reservoir, Alpine Dams here in the lower right corner. We've got the Bontempi Dam and Lagunitas Dam upstream. Here's the existing reservoir. We first looked at, well, how far can we raise the reservoir before we run into the toe of the Bontempi Dam? Submerging the toe doesn't necessarily mean that dam is compromised, but it makes operations more difficult. It may mean that dam would have to be reanalyzed and approved by DSOD. And the other problem we have is you start to run through the gap here, runs out into the area of the Meadows Golf Course. And if you start to raise it even further, it will spill out over this cap here. So, and that raise only provided about 5,000 acre feet of additional storage. So looks like that's a non-starter. Next, we looked at how high do we need to go to achieve our goal of 20,000 acre feet. And that's what the reservoir looks like for that arrangement. If we put a saddle dam in this little gap here, that protects the area to the north. But now the Bontempi Dam is almost fully submerged, which is probably not good for the stability of that dam. So once you're at that point, we looked at, well, why don't we just raise it even further and match the spillway of Bontempi Dam? And that yields 23,000 acre feet. Again, here's the saddle dam that contains the water before it goes over to the north. In this configuration, Bontempi Dam could be breached and you just operate both reservoirs together. Once you've breached this dam, it's no longer retaining water. You don't need a DSOD license. So the stability issues would go away there. Just quickly show you what the dam section would look like. Here's the existing dam. This is the 5,000 acre foot dam, raised about 21 feet. Here's what the 23,000 acre foot dam would look like. So it's quite a bit higher, 75 feet. Whoops. Yeah, the slope here is shown a little bit flatter than the existing dam. Existing dam is 0.8 to 1 slope. This dam more in keeping with modern practice. It's about 1 to 1 slope or 45 degrees, but still a very small footprint compared to embankment dam.
You don't mention the Bolinas Fairfax Road. Would that be inundated?
Is that the road on the top of the dam?
Right, right. And it comes around the side of Alpine Lake.
It would be in parts. Yep. But I think they're relatively short. The road does go very close to the existing shore where it crosses the dam. And I think there may be another point to the north. Is that the area you're thinking of?
Yep.
Yep. So here's the existing dam and the new dam. So again, the footprint relatively small. It is quite a bit higher dam and deeper reservoir. Moving on to Nicasio Reservoir, Seeger Dam. This is a 1961 dam. Again, spillway on the left abutment, the quarry used for the embankment of the dam. This is a much smaller dam. It's in a very good location. It's in a very narrow valley with a broad valley upstream. So you get a lot of additional storage with a small amount of raise. So to achieve your 20,000 acre feet here, we only need 18 feet of raise. It's a small dam to begin with, relatively short and not as tall. So this one can be raised very easily. And the core is not extending out very far. It's over still the existing dam. So get a 3D view of the existing dam and then just a view of what the new dam and reservoir would look like. Here's about where the cut would be for the new spillway and the quarry to raise the dam. So this is really a very attractive site from the dam building standpoint. Unfortunately, it's got a problem for inundation. So you can see the light blue is the existing reservoir. These dashed lines are the new inundation area. So we've got a lot of the county road is underwater, and also a lot of the town of Nicasio is going to be inundated for this dam raise. Here's a summary of the 4 dam raises that we've looked at. These are all to the same scale, so it gives you a good idea how much material is involved, what the new heights look like. Of course, Alpine Dam is much smaller footprint, being a concrete dam. And just a few summary details here, and the ones that stand out. Of course, the largest raise is required for Alpine Dam, just because that's a relatively small reservoir to begin with. The Peters Dam requires by far the most fill, 3 million acre feet, almost 3 times as much as Sulahuli would be. And Nicasio requires the most new inundated areas.
Were there, if you can go back, with Nicasio, where they're like inundating the town of Nicosia seems very undesirable. Were there cofferdam opportunities? I mean, that would take away from some of the storage, but is the very large footprint mitigatable by any sort of cofferdam? I assume you might have looked at that.
Yeah, we have looked at that. In fact, looking at that led to the idea of this upper Nicasio Dam that we'll see in a minute.
Okay.
The issue around the town of Nicasio is there's 2 creeks coming in to the reservoir here, Halleck Creek and Nicasio Creek. So if you put embankments across those dams, you'd either have to put a pump station in to pump the water into the reservoir, or some kind of diversion further upstream and then a gravity pipeline into the reservoir. So it is possible, but it seems pretty complicated. And of course, you've got quite a bit of road that would have to be raised and rebuilt. So now we'll talk about new dam construction. The ones that were in the master plan were the Devil's Gulch and Halleck. We'll talk about those in a minute. And then there's the Upper Nicasio, which is same place as Nicasio Reservoir. Just briefly, again, this is the typical dam section we used. We use the same one for all the dams. So it's an apples to apples comparison. The advantage of a new dam over raising an existing dam is it's all new construction. You have your water barrier, your grout curtain can all be installed as part of the new dam. And you're not having to modify an existing older dam. This is what Devil's Gulch Dam would look like. It's quite high to achieve 20,000 acre feet, around 270 feet high. This is the county road down here in Lagunitas Creek. So this would be just upstream from there. You need a high dam because it's a narrow V-shaped valley. So to get the storage, you have to have a big embankment. Another issue here is there's very little room between the toe of this dam and the road. This is where your spillway would have to discharge, energy dissipation, things like that. So it's a tight space to put a dam in. Here's the Halleck Reservoir site. This is upstream of the town of Nicasio on Halleck Creek. There's a valley here with a ranch. There's a couple possibilities to put a dam where the valley's a little narrower. This one looked the most favorable. And again, it's a V-shaped valley, pretty narrow. So you need a very high dam to get your 20,000 acre feet, 270 feet high. Here's the Upper Nicasio site. So this is the existing Nicasio Reservoir. Here's the county road. And back to your point, we did look at, what would it take to put dikes across here to contain a Nicasio dam raise. And when we started looking at this, it looked like a good opportunity just to put a new dam. There's a pretty broad valley with steep sides upstream from here. So here's the area we're talking about, the existing Nicasio Reservoir, town of Nicasio's over here, and the existing dam. So we're going to focus in on this rectangle in the next few slides. Here's the county road, just for reference. This is the existing reservoir. And here's what the 20,000 acre foot reservoir would look like. This is not as high a dam as the others we've looked at. This is only about 100 feet high, but it's quite a bit longer because it's a broad valley. But the reservoir area is relatively small for the amount of storage that we get. Quick comparison of these new dam options. Again, here's the Upper Nicasio, not as tall, but quite a bit longer. The biggest dam by far would be the Halleck Dam, 10 million cubic yards. That's over twice as big as the other two that we're looking at. Here's a quick comparison of all the dam options. So the existing dams are shown with the solid lines. What this chart is showing us is on the x-axis, this is the height of the reservoir above the existing ground or existing reservoir. And here's the amount of acre feet that you achieve. Here's our target, 20,000 acre feet is this blue line. So the better lines are over here to the left, just meaning you achieve that extra storage with a much smaller dam raise. The new dams, by comparison, especially Devil's Gulch and Halleck, way out here to the right, we mentioned the V-shaped valleys are not very attractive for creating a lot of storage with the given height. Upper Nicasio is pretty good. It's lining up pretty closely with Alpine and the other existing dams. I'm just going to talk about one of the spillways tonight because it's different from the others. And that's the Nicasio spillway. So just want a quick photo here of what we're talking about for flashboards. Flashboards are a relatively low wall, usually made of timbers with steel stanchions or posts to hold them in place. And these are used to store additional water above the top of the spillway. Sometimes these are removable, sometimes they're trippable, meaning they can be released on either manually or when you exceed a certain head of water over the top. So here's the Nicasio spillway. This is a side channel entrance spillway, which means it has a pretty long weir where the water flows over. So this is the recent photo with it spilling. Here's the top of the weir. So like the photo we just saw, these flashboards would just be placed on the top of this weir. They would be boards probably with wide flange beams that are concreted into place or anchored into place. What we found when we did the research on Nicasio was in the 1959, some of the earlier reports, they were debating whether to add gates to the dam at that time. And they looked at a couple options. If you look over here on the left, these are the weirs for the different spillways. And they considered one with the radial gate on the bottom, one with flashboards, like we're talking about right now, and one with no gates. And what they actually built was this one in the middle, which could be modified to have flashboards. On the right here, what you see is the different dam crests that they were considering. And these dam crests need to provide freeboard for when you have a flood, the design flood event, there's water flowing over the spillway, and you have to have sufficient freeboard so that the dam doesn't overtop. And again, the upper dam crest here was the dam for radial gates. 2 feet below that is the dam they actually built. And here's the dam crest they needed for a spillway with no gates. So what we think they did was they actually had a compromise. They didn't actually install the gates or the flashboards at that time, but they built the dam with sufficient freeboard to allow that in the future. And here's what we think could be feasible. We think with the given freeboard for the design flood right now, we could probably put 3.5 feet of flashboards in and leave them in all year. And what that would yield, this is a similar chart where we see the height of the spillway gate and the amount of extra storage you get. So for a 3.5 foot flashboard, we could get about 3,000 acre feet additional storage.
Okay, I think it's back to me for the next 50 slides. No, thanks, Bob. That was great for whipping through those. I know it's getting late. So our summary then is we've got options, right? So there are several enlargement possibilities that we're continuing to look at. And we'll come back to you with more information on. Exciting, the Nicasio flashboards, if the as-builts and the information around that are hold. It's about as simple an engineering installation as you could imagine. Of course, there still may be the permitting side that we need to get through, but that is still very encouraging.
And the costs.
The cost? Yeah.
We're talking about big bucks here.
For the flashboards?
Well, not for flashboards.
Yeah, that's all I'm talking about there.
3 million cubic yards and 10 million cubic yards. Those are big dollars.
Yeah, some big numbers. And these are big projects, right? So these are generational projects, and we'll get to the cost information as soon as we have it.
Sure.
But we want to be able to screen these down, and cost will be an important factor in the screening process for us. We're hoping to come back to the board in May to give you an idea of what those sort of range of costs might look like, and to start talking about what those proposed short list might look like. And that, I think, concludes our presentation this evening.
Is there enough water at Nicasio to fill the extra 3,000 acre feet?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think Bob was looking at the hydrology, and I think from 1996 to present, it's, at or near spill 96% of the time.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Bob. Everybody for all of the good work and clear presentations. We'll start with directors' comments and questions. Monty, do you want to kick it off?
Wow. I'll try not to do all of my questions here just because of how late it is. I think thank you. This is really a lot to think about. And the design information that you just provided is really, really helpful. Probably means more to Larry as an engineer than it does to me, more coming from the biology. But I just a couple of thoughts here. One is all these locations, and Larry sort of kind of got at this maybe a little bit, is asking about the actual yield. So this is creating the space, the storable space, but is there the runoff? The runoff in each of these locations is not the same. And so I think it would be really helpful to see an analysis of, the yield, with future year scenarios commensurate with the storage increase, because ultimately that space is only as valuable as we can fill it. And so that would be helpful to understand how the potential runoff in different locations, how often we might be able to take advantage of that. Another facet of this, of course, is the cost. That was notably absent. I'm sure that we all are curious, just in approximations of what these different options might cost, and not only to construct, but obviously the area of inundation is really is a significant issue. If it's not lands that are part of the district, these are probably public lands, private lands, and the costs of acquiring them and the feasibility of it. Inundating the town of Nicasio, I would say right out of the gates, is not feasible. But the cost of the land that is privately held, it would just be really important to understand area of inundation, how much of it is in different types of ownership, and maybe in future maps we could see area of inundation broken out and color coded in MMWD land versus public private. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Monty. Matt?
To echo the thank you, this was a very helpful presentation, and it's really interesting to see how this process is starting to evolve, and we're starting to really see where the rubber meets the road. So appreciate the expertise and the insight, especially all the energy going into alternatives that might not bear any fruit for us, so we understand the implications of that. To follow up on what Monty was saying, when we look at these inundation maps, it'd be helpful to see structures and things like that, so we have a real understanding of the impact that these potential projects could have on someone's land or their lifestyle or livelihood, potentially based on the use of their land. And then the other component would be when we looked at the Alpine Dam, you showed a few different scenarios, raising it a little bit for 5,000 cubic feet, et cetera. It'd be interesting to see what those costs would be, even for those smaller ones, if we look to potentially add a few different projects. So looking at Upper Nicasio plus an Alpine raise, and see if we can, one, afford it, but also two, see if it makes sense when we look at it from a storage perspective. Because this starts getting real interesting when we complete the Phoenix to Bontempi loop, and then that's close to an Alpine, and we're starting to see some things that look like real solutions. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Jed?
Yeah, thanks again for the presentation. And this is another example of Marin Water taking our water supply and storage roadmap into fruition, and the work is beginning and it's happening. And I hope the public appreciates it. I have a couple of questions. One is, it would be good to understand why we picked 20,000 acre feet for the relative numbers. We've talked, I think, about 10, 15,000 acre feet. We'd have different numbers, but it could be that at 10,000 or 15,000 acre feet, the cost per acre foot might go down significantly. Although I understand if we do a big project like that, you want to kind of go for it as best as you can, but that might be a factor into the cost. And I don't know if that's doubling your work, but I think that'd be interesting. In addition to cost, we obviously have to look at the environmental impact on our critical habitat and our native species and our watershed. So I'd like to make sure that that is at the top of our additional criteria. And then lastly, it would be good, as Monty and Matt said, to understand the impact on neighbors, on landowners, on municipalities and other folks, and how difficult it would be to get some of these done. Specifically, I know the Suluhuli folks that would be impacted created their own map. It'd be really interesting to see how their map differs from the map that you just showed us, and maybe it'll make them at ease, or maybe it'll make them less at ease. But we're starting to get to the point where these discussions are going to have to help us understand what's possible. Thank you.
Yeah, good points, Jed. Larry, anything else? Great. I think just as a consideration when we're thinking about enhanced storage, we're thinking about our ability to capture more runoff and also potentially store more water that is imported from the north. So I think we recognize that there's a lot of consideration when you think about the capacities that we're looking at, but nevertheless, if there are ways to achieve that capacity in a phased approach, it seems like that may not be the most economically viable way to do it, but smaller incremental steps towards achieving that 20,000 acre feet. If we see anything there that might be achievable, it'd be great to hear about that as well.
Yeah, I think from the comments that I've heard, the criteria that we've got for the evaluation process, I think is right aligned with where the board are and what you're thinking and what I'm hearing. So those are all great comments.
Yeah, Paul, I think I agree generally. I do think the comment on the 20,000 and kind of maybe doing a sensitivity on that, at a course level.
Absolutely. I think that it's a nominal number that we're looking at, and it came out of the SWUSA. So it's sort of a starting point, and absolutely there may be a 17,000 acre foot that's where the cutoff, and there's a big jump in costs at that point. So we will be taking a look at those kinds of approaches. So.
I was going to say like an optimization curve, like of each site, like with the optimum cost benefit for each location might yield sort of that there's a multiple, project option that gets us to our target. One other thing I think we really do need to, again, try to understand is what would be the water rights permitting associated with doing one of these projects, because we're assuming that you put in a project and we get to have all the yield. And I imagine that the water board will have an opinion, and let's just leave it at that. And it could substantially reduce the yield to the point where the cost per acre foot could go up. And I don't know how we start to get a handle on that question, but I do think that and whether it might look differently for different reservoirs.
It's a very important question, one that we need to have the answer to before we make any real commitments to these projects. So we're working on the water rights questions behind the scenes, and we'll be back to you with hopefully some information on that.
I'm getting, now you told me that. Now I want to know when, because I know this is a question that we have been asking for a while, and it could really be a substantial influencer on what we do, and whether a spillway raise triggers something or not, or a new reservoir site versus raising an existing site. These are things that just have big influence. So we'll hear back.
I'll have to get back to you on a date.
Okay.
I mean, part of it, Director Schmidt, is we have, right, a whole number of options and sub-options. So we don't want to look at necessarily water rights for Halleck Dam, right? Because that'll be ruled out. So the thought is we do need to narrow these a bit.
Yeah.
But there is a fair amount of work going on behind the scenes with fishery staff, starting to talk to resource agencies, digging into our order. Molly's brought a water rights expert attorney to support it. We have consultants supporting it. So there is a lot of work going on that we'll be able to narrow once get to that point.
The flashboard option at Nicasio, it would seem very surprising if that ends up going off the table. I wonder if that's one that we start to accelerate activities on, including water right evaluations.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think there's probably a bit of confirmation, but I'd say certainly by the time we come back in May, I'd expect potentially that would be viewed as a no-brainer that the board suggests we just start moving on. Absolutely.
Right.
Well, perhaps. But
Perhaps.
material issue there really concerns me using wood. I mean, it's going to weather. I don't know how long you anticipate for its life, but I can't see more than like 5 years in a critical situation like that where it has to hold when it gets used. So I'm a little concerned about that. You know, it seems to me something like fiberglass or some non-wood material would be a good alternative there. The structural side of it looks fine with the posts and that.
Yeah.
It's just the actual dam is, you know, I mean, you can't really use treated wood because drinking water reservoir. So I don't know what you would actually use there. Those are beautiful pieces of wood that you had, but I don't know about that one. That one does concern me.
Yeah, other materials can be used, steel,
Sure,
fiberglass,
sure.
but wood is very commonly used for that.
Sure, I understand, but you got to be prepared to replace it.
Anything else? Otherwise, I think we'll move to public comments.
Yes, we have several. The first three are Larry Menikis, Ed Jamison, and then Mr. Phil Sauter. Go ahead, Mr. Menikis.
Yeah, good evening again. I'd like to thank the consultants for an understandable presentation tonight. And it's clear that with each one of these, there's a number of complexities. And what would be really helpful is if somehow this could be placed on a chart where we could show opportunities or benefits, the challenges involved, and the costs that will be involved with that, so that it can sort of be charted out and seen in that format. I think it'd be helpful both to the board and the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jamison, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, thanks. This was a great presentation. Net of evaporation, raising a dam by 20,000 acre feet would provide only 4,000 acre feet per year in a 4-year drought. Only a partial contribution to our need of 15 to 20,000 acre feet per year in drought, less whatever we can save from automated stream releases. A dam raised could certainly be a piece of our drought insufficiency solution, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Phil Sauter and then Miss Carol D.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was great to see all these options. My brain is spinning with numbers and very large numbers tonight as we talk about supply. It seems like there's almost no limit to the amount of money we could spend on increasing supply. As Director Smith pointed out a month ago, supply is half of the equation, demand is the other half. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the demand management presentation in May. One of the things I'm really surprised that the board hasn't asked for and that staff hasn't brought forward yet is the demand equation and just how many people we're talking about that we're going out and getting this supply for. Is it 60,000 of our customers who need this extra water? I sure don't need it. Nobody I've talked to really needs this extra water. I don't know how many customers we have that we're going out and getting this supply for. It would be really nice to know if it's 30,000 people that we're going to satisfy by inundating Nicasio, or if it's 3,000 people that we're going to satisfy. I really would like to know those numbers. Who are we talking about that have these high needs and need us to go out and find 20,000 acre feet of storage? Not who are they, but how many are they? could it be that maybe we give them a check for $25,000 and that would be enough for them to re-landscape and not need this much water? We don't know those numbers, and I've just been asking for them for over a year now, and I really hope at some point the board is going to ask for them too, that we can all share. Thank you.
Thank you. Carol D., then Marilyn Price.
Good evening. I'll be brief. I'm commenting as a member of the West Marin rural community, which borders on the Sula Hula Reservoir. We're sort of your steadfast followers in this whole process, since it impacts us quite directly. I want to say I'm very grateful to the board and to the staff and to the presenters for the efforts you've been making to be thorough and fair and transparent as you work towards a more resilient water supply for Marin Water customers. I'm very encouraged to hear people who advocate for looking at the demand side, which of course is very important. I feel like, we're always broadening our freeways and they just fill up with more cars. In a funny way, I feel like increasing supply isn't necessarily the best solution. I would also say that outcomes from your eventual decisions will have far-reaching consequences, some of them beneficial and some of them quite detrimental. The inundation area for the Sula Hula Reservoir, which actually wasn't discussed in the presentation, will destroy multi-generational family homes, businesses, infrastructure. I think it will affect at least 8 different privately owned agricultural families in West Marin. We're not a city, we're not incorporated, but it would have a pretty negative impact on us. So I definitely wanted the consultants to know about that. So I urge you, as you go on, just continue to keep all Marin communities in mind as you move forward. And thanks very much for letting me comment.
Thank you. Miss Marilyn Price, please.
Yeah, well, I will just say and I didn't add when you were talking about the gophers, because I read about the gophers too and how they are considered now to be advantageous. So I'm glad you're looking into that. And on the theme of that, definitely looking at all the environmental things that follow from, dams and anything we are doing, to increase our supply in this technological world we're living in. And we never know, what the consequences are really going to be. And that's why I'm very encouraged to hear, or excited to hear how we are going to approach it from a demand side. Pleased to hear Phil bring that up and the importance of controlling the demand. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then I think we'll move on. Thanks again, Paul, Bob, everybody, for the great update. Terry, I think the last item on our agenda is our future board and committee meetings.
Yes, good evening. This Thursday is the Watershed Committee meeting at 9:30 in the morning. One of the key items is the continuation of the draft Watershed Recreation Management Planning Feasibility Study. Next Thursday is on March 28th is the Finance and Administration Committee meeting. There will be a legal review of the Brown Act, Public Records Act, and campaign laws with you guys, a training. On April 2nd, 5:30 p.m. That's because there's a closed session at 5:30, but it's a regular board meeting. The key item for that is the water conveyance update. On April 5th, later that week, is the Operations Committee meeting. One of the key items for that is the main break response update. Some external meetings coming up. April 8th is the Sonoma WACTAC meeting at 9 o'clock. And then April 19th is the North Bay Watershed Association conference. So if you're still...
WACTAC or it's TAC?
It's WACTAC.
Oh, that's...
Yeah, WACTAC. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Terry. And with that, I will adjourn our directors meeting of March 19th, 2024.